The sun was setting over the dusty plains, painting the sky in deep oranges and soft pinks. Nayeli, a young Apache woman, moved quietly along the edge of the small frontier town. Her heart pounded with every step, not because she was lost, but because she knew danger could be waiting behind any corner. The recent attacks on her village had left her alone, without family or friends. She had watched her home disappear into flames, and now she was far from the familiar forests and rivers of her childhood. All she had was the knowledge that she had to survive. Nayeli's feet were sore from walking all day, but she kept moving. She had heard stories from other travelers about the town ahead, stories of a rough, dusty place filled with cowboys, traders, and travelers looking for gold or work. It was not a place meant for a lone woman, especially not one who did not belong. Yet she had no choice. She needed shelter, food, and most importantly, somewhere to hide. The town looked quiet from a distance. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their signs swaying gently in the wind. Horses were tied to posts outside saloons, their heads swinging lazily as they chewed on bits of straw. The faint sound of laughter and the clink of glasses drifted from an open doorway. Nayeli paused behind a stack of firewood, watching as a man walked down the street. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a hat that shaded his face. There was something about him that made him different from the others, calm, careful, and confident. He seemed to move with purpose, yet with ease, as though he belonged to this land in a way she might never understand. This man was Caleb Monroe, a cowboy known to some for his skill with horses, and to others for his quiet nature. He rarely spoke more than needed, but his eyes were sharp, noticing things others missed. Nayeli studied him from a distance, curious about the life he led. She did not know if he would help or harm her, but instinct told her that there was something trustworthy about him. As night fell, Nayeli slipped closer to the town. The streets were dimly lit, lanterns casting long shadows across the wooden boards. The townsfolk had begun to retreat to their homes, leaving only the occasional figure moving quickly to avoid the chill of the evening. Nayeli's small frame allowed her to move unseen, blending with the shadows as if she were part of them. She kept her eyes on Caleb, watching as he entered a modest cabin at the edge of the town. It was quiet, surrounded by a small corral and a few barrels. No one seemed to notice when the door closed behind him. Nayeli crouched behind a bush, thinking quickly. The cabin could provide safety for the night, and perhaps more if she was clever. She had to be careful. She had learned in the wilderness that survival depended on patience and attention to detail. Any mistake could be fatal. She waited until the house was silent before moving closer, her movements slow and deliberate. Every step was calculated, every sound measured. The cabin was old but sturdy, built from rough-hewn logs and weathered timber. Nayeli examined the windows, the door, and even the gaps between the boards. Her eyes finally landed on the wardrobe inside, an old wooden piece that looked strong enough to hide her. She had learned long ago that hiding could be a life-saving skill. Sometimes it was not about fighting, but about waiting and observing. And so, she made her choice. She slipped inside the wardrobe, pressing her back against the cool wood, her heart still racing from the close call outside. Inside, it was dark, the kind of darkness that makes everything feel silent and heavy. Nayeli could hear her own breathing, the faint creak of the cabin settling, and the occasional shuffle of Caleb's boots as he moved around. She watched as he lit a small lantern, casting a soft glow that flickered across the walls. He set his hat carefully on a hook, unbuckled his belt, and began removing his boots. Nayeli's curiosity was piqued. She had never been in such close proximity to another person, and yet she could see that he was meticulous in his habits. He folded his clothes neatly, arranging them with care. As she watched, Nayeli realized something else. Caleb was not like the other men she had seen in the town. There was a gentleness in the way he treated his belongings, a quiet respect for his space. He hummed softly to himself, a melody she did not recognize, but it was comforting. Nayeli felt a strange connection forming, even from her hidden spot. She had not intended to watch him for long, but something about his presence made her feel safer than she had in days. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. Nayeli stayed in the wardrobe, careful not to make a sound. She listened as Caleb moved about, heard the gentle clink of a cup as he drank water, and the soft rustle of paper as he wrote in a notebook. She realized that he was more than a cowboy. He was a man with his own thoughts, routines, and perhaps even loneliness. The thought made her heart ache in a way she did not fully understand. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Nayeli was still hidden, exhausted but alive. She had survived the night, learned more about Caleb, and discovered a small measure of hope. Perhaps, she thought, not all men in this town were dangerous. Perhaps some could be trusted. For now, that was enough. And so, in the quiet cabin on the edge of the dusty town, a young Apache woman hid in a wardrobe, watching a cowboy who did not yet know she existed. Little did she know, this night would mark the beginning of a connection that neither of them could have predicted. A bond formed from curiosity, observation, and the slow, careful understanding of another human being. Days passed, and Nayeli remained hidden in the wardrobe. Each morning, she would wake quietly to the sound of Caleb's movements in the cabin. He followed a strict routine, and through the cracks in the wardrobe, she learned the rhythm of his life. He woke at sunrise, rubbed his eyes, and stretched before tending to his horse in the small corral outside. He spoke softly to the animal, giving it small commands that seemed almost like a conversation. Nayeli watched, fascinated by the way he cared for something so gentle and powerful at the same time. Inside the cabin, Caleb's habits were precise. He carefully folded his clothes, polished his boots, and made his bed with methodical attention. Nayeli realized that his life was simple but disciplined. There was no wasted motion, no carelessness. Even when he cooked, he measured ingredients and cleaned as he went, leaving no mess behind. Nayeli began to admire this about him. She had always lived in the wilderness, where survival depended on speed and caution. But here was a man whose careful attention to small details showed a different kind of strength. At first, Nayeli had intended to watch for only a short while each day, but curiosity drew her back again and again. She discovered that Caleb had small habits she had not expected. He would hum quietly while cooking, a tune soft and almost cheerful, and sometimes he would pause, staring out the window at the rising sun as though lost in thought. Nayeli wondered what memories haunted him, what stories were hidden behind his quiet eyes. She felt a strange mix of fear and comfort being so close to him without him knowing she was there. Nayeli also began to notice his loneliness. There were no visitors to the cabin, and he rarely spoke to anyone outside. The town knew him as a skilled cowboy, but she saw the man behind the skill, a man who seemed to carry invisible weight on his shoulders. Sometimes he would sit for hours at the small wooden table, pen in hand, writing on scraps of paper that he later folded carefully and placed in a drawer. Nayeli could not read the words, but she could feel the thought and emotion behind each stroke of the pen. It seemed as though he was talking to someone long gone or recording memories that could not be shared aloud. Evenings were the hardest for Nayeli to endure. The shadows grew long in the cabin, and Caleb would sit by the small fireplace, warming his hands and staring into the flickering flames. Nayeli could sense the calm and the sorrow that settled over him like a heavy blanket. Sometimes he would whisper to himself, almost like a prayer or a story meant only for the fire to hear. Nayeli felt a connection to him in these quiet moments, a sense that they shared the same world, even though she remained unseen. Curiosity slowly gave way to admiration. Nayeli started to understand that Caleb's strength was not in loudness or aggression, but in quiet determination and care. She noticed the way he moved with confidence yet gentleness, the way he respected his space and the things he owned. Nayeli realized that in the wilderness she had learned to survive by watching and waiting, and here she was learning something similar from him, but in a different way. It was not just survival, it was understanding the rhythms of another person's life. Nayeli became creative in small ways. She began leaving tiny gifts, carefully hidden where he might see them. One morning, she placed a small feather on the table, the kind she had found near the river where she had camped. Another day, she left a tiny carved piece of wood shaped like a horse. She watched from the wardrobe as Caleb noticed these small tokens. He would pause, pick them up, and sometimes smile faintly, as if sensing someone cared about him. Nayeli never made a sound, but it felt like they were beginning a conversation without words, a connection formed through small gestures. As the days turned into weeks, Nayeli's fear of discovery slowly faded, replaced by a cautious comfort. She began to anticipate Caleb's routines, knowing when he would step outside, when he would sit by the fire, and when he would move quietly across the cabin. She learned to move silently within the wardrobe, making herself as invisible as possible. Yet she also discovered that being so close to someone had unexpected effects on her emotions. She found herself thinking about him even when she was not watching, wondering what he would say or do next. Through observation, Naomi also learned about Caleb's character. He was not just strong and disciplined, he was compassionate. One morning, a stray dog wandered near the cabin, hungry and cautious. Caleb noticed it, speaking in a low, kind voice and offering some scraps of food. Naomi watched the animal's fear melt away as Caleb's calm manner reassured it. She realized that his strength was not only in physical skill, but in empathy, in understanding and kindness that extended beyond himself. One evening, as a storm rumbled in the distance, Naomi noticed Caleb working to secure the cabin and the horses. He moved with efficiency, tying down loose boards and checking each lock carefully. Despite the growing wind and rain, he remained calm, showing skill and patience in a situation that could easily become dangerous. Naomi admired the way he faced challenges quietly, without panic or anger. She thought of the hardships she had endured in her own life and realized that, in many ways, he was like her. Someone who had learned to survive in a harsh world through careful attention, patience, and courage. By the end of the second week, Naomi felt almost like a part of the cabin itself. She knew every corner, every creak of the floorboards, and every shadow the lantern cast on the walls. She had learned to anticipate Caleb's movements and understand his moods, though he remained unaware of her presence. There was comfort in this hidden life, yet also a strange loneliness. Naomi longed to speak to someone, but she also knew that revealing herself too soon could be dangerous. She had to wait, observing and learning, understanding that trust and safety were earned slowly. Her observations extended beyond just Caleb's habits. She learned about his past from small hints he left behind, letters tucked into drawers, old photographs, and objects that hinted at a life before the town. She imagined the stories behind each item, perhaps family lost, friends departed, or dreams unfulfilled. Each discovery made him more human to her, more relatable, and less like the distant, mysterious figure she had first seen. Naomi felt a growing sense of empathy and connection, though she remained hidden and silent, unsure how or when she could ever step into the light. By the end of the third week, Naomi realized she had developed a new understanding of people. Watching Caleb had taught her patience, observation, and empathy in a way she had never experienced. She saw the quiet power in someone who acted with care, the courage in someone who faced life's hardships without complaint, and the warmth in someone who could show kindness even when the world was harsh. Naomi felt her own heart change as she learned from him, recognizing that survival was not only about hiding and fleeing, but about understanding, connecting, and respecting life in all its forms. And so, day after day, Naomi continued to hide in the wardrobe, watching Caleb Monroe's quiet life unfold. She was no longer just a frightened woman seeking safety. She had become a careful observer, a silent companion who learned the beauty of patience, routine, and kindness. She did not yet know if she would ever reveal herself, but she understood that some connections are built slowly, in silence and observation, and that trust, once earned, could change lives in ways neither person expected. Days had turned into weeks, and Naomi felt a strange sense of comfort in her hidden place. Each morning she woke with the first light, listening to Caleb's soft movements around the cabin. She had come to know every sound he made, from the shuffle of his boots to the faint rustle of paper as he wrote letters he never sent. She even began to anticipate his routines, knowing when he would step outside to check the horses, or when he would pause to hum quietly while folding his clothes. The rhythm of his life had become familiar to her, and in a way, she felt like a silent partner in his world, even though he did not know she existed. Over time, Naomi began to notice small things about him that made her heart stir in ways she had not expected. There was a gentleness in the way he treated his surroundings, the careful arrangement of his belongings, the way he spoke softly to his horse, even the kindness he showed to stray animals that wandered near the cabin. She began to understand that Caleb was a man shaped not only by the hard life of the frontier, but also by compassion and thoughtfulness. In her own life, she had known only survival, hiding in the wilderness, watching and waiting. But Caleb's quiet care showed her a different kind of strength, one rooted in patience and respect. Naomi had also started leaving tiny gifts, small objects she hoped might reach him. A carved feather, a smooth stone, or a folded leaf placed just where he might notice. She watched from her hiding spot as Caleb discovered them. Sometimes he picked them up and smiled faintly, or he would examine them with curiosity before placing them carefully on a shelf. He never spoke aloud about them, but his gestures were enough to reassure Naeli that he sensed someone was watching over him. It gave her courage to continue these small acts, a way to communicate without words, a silent acknowledgement of her presence and care. One day, Naeli noticed something new. Caleb had returned from town with a bundle of supplies, and he seemed more thoughtful than usual. He checked each item carefully, unpacking and arranging them with precision. He paused often, looking out the window as though he was considering something beyond the immediate task. Naeli felt a tug of curiosity, what occupied his thoughts so deeply. She wondered if he thought about people from his past, or perhaps about the loneliness that she sensed in him. Each day, she realized, she was learning more about not only his routines, but also the way his mind worked. Naeli also observed how Caleb handled challenges. One morning, a sudden gust of wind knocked over a barrel outside, spilling its contents across the ground. Without hesitation, Caleb rushed to fix the mess, moving with careful speed to secure the items and the surrounding area. He worked steadily, never showing anger or frustration, only quiet determination. Naeli marveled at his calmness, the way he faced problems with logic and patience rather than force or harshness. It reminded her of the lessons she had learned in the wild. Sometimes, the world tested a person not with danger but with patience and persistence. Over time, Naeli began to feel a connection that went beyond simple curiosity. She found herself thinking about Caleb even when she was not observing him, imagining his day, wondering what he might say, or how he would respond to events in the town. She recognized a warmth in him that was rare in the harsh life she had known, a kindness that reached beyond himself and into the world he touched. It was a comfort she had not felt in a long time, a sense that maybe, just maybe, not all people were as harsh or unforgiving as life had forced her to believe. As the days passed, Naeli's admiration for Caleb grew deeper. She noticed the small, human moments he allowed himself, the smile he gave to a passing child, the way he carefully cleaned his boots after a muddy ride, the small nods he offered to townsfolk even when he did not speak much. Each act, seemingly minor to others, told her more about the kind of man he was. He was strong but not cruel, disciplined but not rigid, serious but capable of joy in the simplest things. Naeli felt herself learning from him, understanding that strength and gentleness could coexist, and that life was richer when guided by care and attention. One evening, a storm rolled in from the plains, heavy clouds darkening the sky and wind whipping across the cabin. Naeli watched as Caleb moved quickly yet calmly, securing the horses and checking the cabin for loose boards. He worked efficiently, knowing exactly what needed to be done to weather the storm. She admired his courage, not the kind shown in battle or confrontation, but the quiet courage that faced natural challenges with steady resolve. She realized that this was another lesson she could take with her. That bravery came in many forms, and sometimes it was shown in small, careful actions rather than grand gestures. In addition to observing his routines, Naeli began to learn more about Caleb's inner life. She found small notes and letters tucked into drawers, photographs that hinted at a family or friends he had lost, and objects that suggested experiences she could only imagine. Though she could not read all of the details, the emotions behind them were clear. There was love, grief, hope, and perhaps regret. Naeli felt a growing sense of empathy for him, recognizing that everyone carried unseen burdens. Even in her own life, filled with loss and fear, she understood that human experiences were more connected than she had realized, and that observing Caleb had opened her heart to understanding others in new ways. As the days turned into weeks, Naeli found herself thinking about what it would mean to step out of hiding. She was still cautious, aware of the risks, but the growing bond she felt with Caleb made her wonder if trust could be possible. She had survived by remaining invisible, yet a part of her longed to connect, to share in the life she had been silently observing. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with hope, a hope that perhaps not all relationships were built on fear, and that some could grow slowly, carefully, and safely, just as hers was beginning to. In the quiet hours of the night, Naeli sometimes whispered softly to herself, practicing the words she might say if the time came to reveal her presence. She imagined telling him who she was, why she had come, and how she had come to admire and trust him without a single word exchanged. Each scenario played out in her mind, and each ended with her heart beating faster. She knew that patience was essential, that the right moment would come, but until then, observation and small gestures were her only way of communicating. By the end of the third week, Nayeli felt she had become more than just a hidden observer. She had developed an understanding of Caleb's habits, his character, and even his heart. She realized that her own feelings were changing, growing from mere curiosity into admiration and respect. She began to see a world beyond survival, a world where kindness, patience, and connection mattered as much as courage and skill. Watching him had taught her that life could be lived fully even in the harshest conditions, if one paid attention, cared deeply, and moved with thoughtfulness. And so each day, Nayeli continued to watch, quietly learning, quietly caring, and quietly forming a bond that neither she nor Caleb fully understood. It was a bond built not on words, but on observation, understanding, and silent connection. It grew slowly, like the soft light of dawn spreading across the plains, and it promised that one day, when the time was right, her presence might be revealed, not as a threat, but as a beginning of something entirely new. One morning, as the sun spilled golden light across the dusty cabin floor, Nayeli awoke to the familiar sounds of Caleb moving about. The quiet rhythm of his day had become almost like a song she could hum in her mind. The shuffle of his boots, the soft clink of a cup, and the faint scratch of pen on paper as he wrote letters. She had grown so accustomed to observing him that she almost forgot how dangerous it was to remain hidden. But as always, she reminded herself to be careful. Any sudden movement could reveal her, and she could not yet trust that Caleb would understand why she was there. Caleb had stepped out to check the corral, his tall figure casting long shadows on the ground. Nayeli waited until the cabin was empty, then carefully shifted in the wardrobe to watch him from the safety of her hiding place. She noticed that today he seemed distracted, moving with a slight tension she had not seen before. He kept glancing toward the window and frowning, as if something in the town troubled him. Nayeli's heart beat faster, sensing that the day might not pass as quietly as others had. She tried to make herself as small and silent as possible, listening intently. For a while the morning passed quietly. Nayeli watched as Caleb tended to the cabin, swept the floor, and polished his boots. Then, without warning, she reached slightly to peek at a letter on the table. It had shifted when he had set it down earlier, and she wanted to see what he had written. But in that brief moment, her hand knocked against the edge of a shelf. A sudden loud crash echoed through the room as a stack of wooden boxes toppled over. Nayeli froze, her breath caught in her throat. She had been discovered. Caleb spun around immediately, his eyes wide with shock. He saw a shadow move from the wardrobe and took a cautious step forward. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, carrying a note of suspicion. Nayeli tried to shrink further into the dark space, her heart racing. She did not move, knowing that any sudden gesture could make him angry or fearful. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, of running into the streets and vanishing into the crowd outside. But she also realized that the wardrobe was the only place she could hide for now. Caleb approached slowly, peering into the wardrobe. Nayeli could feel his gaze on her, sharp and searching. His expression changed from surprise to confusion as he noticed her small, trembling form. He knelt down slightly, speaking softly but clearly. "It's all right. I don't mean to hurt you. Who are you?" His tone was different from the harsh words she had feared. There was curiosity and patience there, not anger or aggression. Nayeli's hands shook as she considered how to respond. She had spent weeks observing him, learning his habits, and now she had to trust that he might understand. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, Nayeli spoke. "My name is Nayeli. I had nowhere else to go. I didn't mean to frighten you." Her words came out slowly, haltingly, as though saying them aloud made them real. Caleb listened quietly, nodding slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. He seemed to be weighing her words, trying to understand the situation before acting. Nayeli's heart pounded in her chest, each second feeling like an eternity. After a long pause, Caleb reached out gently, motioning for her to step out. Nayeli hesitated. The wardrobe felt safe, familiar, and protective. But she realized that remaining hidden was no longer an option. With careful steps, she emerged, keeping her gaze lowered but aware of every movement. Caleb did not move abruptly or step back. Instead, he stayed calm, watching her with patience and attention. It was the first sign that perhaps she had made the right decision in trusting him. Once she was fully visible, Caleb studied her quietly, noticing the dirt on her clothes, the weariness in her eyes, and the tension in her posture. He did not ask questions immediately, allowing her to gather courage. Nayeli felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She had survived so long by hiding, and now she was facing someone she had admired from the shadows. The thought of rejection or anger made her stomach tighten, but she also felt a growing sense of trust. Caleb finally spoke, his voice calm but gentle. "You've been hiding here for days. Why didn't you come out sooner?" Nayeli's lips trembled as she explained. She told him about her village, the attack, and how she had nowhere else to go. She spoke carefully, aware that every word could change the way he saw her. Caleb listened, nodding slowly, never interrupting, his expression thoughtful. Nayeli noticed that his eyes softened as she spoke, and she felt a tiny spark of hope. He finally said, "I see, you needed a place to be safe. You didn't mean any harm." His voice carried understanding, not judgment. Nayeli felt tears prick at her eyes. She had feared discovery, confrontation, or even punishment, but instead she found calm and empathy. For the first time since leaving her village, she felt that she might be able to trust someone completely. Caleb then stood and moved to the fireplace, gesturing toward a chair. "Sit down, you must be tired and hungry." Nayeli hesitated, then slowly accepted the gesture. Caleb brought her a cup of warm water and some bread, simple but nourishing. She ate quietly, aware of how strange it felt to be treated with kindness instead of suspicion. Each bite seemed to restore a little of the hope she had lost when her village was destroyed. She realized that, despite the fear and danger she had endured, there were still people in the world who could show care and understanding. Over the next hours, Caleb asked her gently about herself, where she had come from, and what had brought her to the town. Nayeli answered honestly but cautiously, revealing only what she felt safe sharing. Caleb listened patiently, offering no judgment or harsh words. Nayeli began to notice small signs of warmth, his gentle nods, the way he leaned slightly forward when she spoke, and the soft smile he offered when she hesitated or looked uncertain. For the first time, Nayeli felt seen not as a stranger or intruder, but as a person with experiences, fears, and hope. As the day went on, Nayeli realized that her hidden life had changed forever. The wardrobe that had once been her safe haven now felt like a barrier she no longer needed. She had stepped into the light, faced her fear, and discovered that Caleb Monroe, the man she had observed for weeks, was capable of understanding and compassion. She felt a strange mix of relief, gratitude, and curiosity. What had begun as observation and secrecy was slowly transforming into connection and trust, a bond built not on words alone, but on patience, understanding, and quiet courage. That night, as the stars filled the sky and the wind whispered across the plains, Nayeli lay in a corner of the cabin, no longer hiding. She watched Caleb tending the fire, his movements calm and steady. She realized that life could change in an instant, that trust could be built even after fear, and that sometimes revealing oneself was not a risk but a beginning. The night was still, filled with possibility, and Nayeli felt for the first time in weeks that she was not alone. She understood, too, that their connection was fragile and new. It would take time, patience, and continued care to grow stronger. But for the first time, Nayeli felt that she could step into the world beyond hiding, guided by courage, observation, and the understanding that not all people sought to harm. Caleb Monroe had not only discovered her, but he had also opened the door to hope, to trust, and to the possibility of a bond that could change both their lives in ways neither had expected. After the discovery, life in the cabin changed in ways Nayeli had not fully expected. For the first time in weeks, she no longer hid. The wardrobe that had been her safe haven now felt like a symbol of fear she no longer needed. She had revealed herself to Caleb Monroe, and instead of anger or rejection, she found patience, understanding, and care. Yet even with this relief, Nayeli knew that trust was fragile. She moved cautiously, careful not to overstep, aware that she was still an outsider in this man's life. Caleb had been gentle with her from the moment he realized she was there. He offered her food, warmth, and a safe space, allowing her to settle without pressing her for answers. He asked questions softly, listening carefully to her story without judgment or interruption. Nayeli found herself relaxing, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. For the first time in months, she felt that someone truly understood her, not just her situation, but her thoughts, fears, and hopes. Days turned into weeks, and Nayeli began to help around the cabin. She carried water, tended to the small garden Caleb had started, and learned to care for the horses alongside him. She observed him as he worked, and he, in turn, showed her small skills: how to saddle a horse, how to start a fire, and how to track animals in the plains. These lessons were not just about survival. They were lessons in trust and partnership. Nayeli realized that she was learning more than skills. She was learning about patience, cooperation, and the quiet strength that comes from caring for another person. Their mornings were calm and filled with shared routines. Caleb would rise early, checking the corral and tending to the horses, while Nayeli prepared breakfast and cleaned the cabin. They rarely spoke at first, communicating instead through gestures, glances, and the small rituals they shared. But as the days passed, conversation grew naturally. Nayeli told him about her life before the raid, her village, and her family. Caleb shared stories of his own past, of losses he had endured and lessons he had learned on the frontier. The stories were simple, but each one built a bridge between them, connecting their worlds in ways that neither had anticipated. Nayeli found herself thinking often about Caleb, not just in admiration but in genuine care. She noticed the way his brow furrowed when he worried, the gentle tone he used with the animals, and the small moments of reflection when he stared out at the plains. Caleb, in turn, noticed her attentiveness, her quiet competence, and her willingness to learn. Their bond grew stronger, built on mutual respect and shared experience. It was a slow, careful process, but it felt natural, like two streams joining to form a river. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Rain pelted the cabin roof, and the wind howled around the corners. Caleb and Nayeli worked together to secure the animals and protect the cabin. In the chaos, Nayeli realized how much she trusted him. She followed his instructions without hesitation, knowing that his calm judgment would keep them both safe. And when the storm passed, they sat by the fire together, sharing dry blankets and warm tea. In those quiet moments, the bond between them deepened, not through words alone, but through shared experience, trust, and understanding. Over time, Nayeli began to feel a sense of belonging she had not known since leaving her village. The cabin, once a place of hiding and fear, became a home. Caleb had given her more than safety. He had given her the chance to rebuild a life, to connect with someone who saw her for who she truly was. She began to dream of the future, imagining a life where she could contribute, share, and care for another person, not just survive. Each day brought new hope, and with it, the courage to imagine possibilities she had once thought impossible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a brilliant orange, Nayeli found herself speaking more freely than ever. She told Caleb about her hopes, her fears, and even the little things she had observed about him from the wardrobe weeks before. He listened, smiling softly at her honesty and curiosity. He laughed at some of her observations, shaking his head in amusement, and nodded at others in quiet understanding. In that moment, Nayeli realized that the walls she had built around her heart were beginning to crumble, replaced by trust, friendship, and something deeper she was only beginning to understand. Caleb, too, began to open up in ways he had never done before. He shared memories of family and friends lost, of hardships he had faced alone, and of moments when life had tested him in ways that had seemed impossible. Nayeli listened carefully, offering empathy and understanding. She did not rush him, did not judge or try to fix the past. She simply listened, offering a presence that was steady, patient, and kind. In return, Caleb began to rely on her company, her insight, and her quiet strength. As the days continued, Nayeli realized that she had a choice to make. She could remain cautious, keeping herself distant and safe, or she could embrace the bond they had formed, trusting Caleb with her presence, her story, and her heart. The fear of rejection or harm still lingered, but it was outweighed by the hope and connection she now felt. She reflected on all she had learned from his patience, his care, and his quiet courage, and understood that the trust they had built was a foundation she could step onto, even if it was fragile and new. One morning, Nayeli approached Caleb as he tended the horses. She looked at him steadily, her heart pounding, and spoke clearly. "I want to stay," she said simply, Not hidden, not just watching, but here with you. I trust you and I want to be part of this life. Caleb paused, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and warmth. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, a smile of understanding, acceptance, and relief. He nodded, extending his hand to her. Then stay, he said softly. You're welcome here, we'll face this together. In that moment, Nayeli felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had made the choice to step fully into the light, to trust, and to be part of a shared life. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge of fear, but a home filled with possibility. She realized that her journey, though filled with loss and danger, had led her to a place where connection, understanding, and trust could exist. She had survived by hiding, observed by watching, and now she would thrive by stepping forward with courage and openness. Over the following weeks, their life together grew more natural. They worked side by side, shared meals, and spoke openly about dreams and plans. Nayeli contributed her skills, learned new ones from Caleb, and found joy in small routines. The way the fire crackled in the evening, the smell of fresh bread, or the quiet moments watching the sunset. Caleb, in turn, shared the knowledge he had accumulated over years in the frontier, teaching her not only survival skills, but also the values of patience, kindness, and quiet strength. By the time spring approached, the bond between Nayeli and Caleb had deepened into something neither could have anticipated when she first hid in the wardrobe. What began in secrecy, curiosity, and observation had grown into a partnership built on trust, respect, and understanding. They were no longer just teacher and student, observer and observed, or protector and protected. They were companions, equals, and friends who had faced fear, uncertainty, and change together, and had found hope and connection in the process. Nayeli realized, finally, that her life had shifted from one of hiding to one of choice. She had chosen to trust, to belong, and to care. And in return, she had been met with patience, understanding, and a shared desire to create a life together. The story of the young Apache woman hiding in the cowboy's wardrobe had ended not in fear or anger, but in courage, connection, and the quiet triumph of human trust and kindness.